President, if the senator from Utah has concluded his remarks, I'd like to say a word or two. Naming this legislation, we have just passed in the Senate a bill that is named the Orrin G. Hatch Music Modernization Act. That was an amendment that I had offered to the bill. It wasn't Senator Hatch's amendment. He's the principal sponsor of the bill, along with Senator Whitehouse and 82 members of this body. But I ask that it be named in his honor. It's fitting because it's the most important piece of legislation in a generation to help make sure that songwriters in our country are paid and are paid a fair market value for their work. It's fitting because Senator Hatch is a songwriter himself and has long been an advocate for musicians. So I can think of no better way to memorialize his 4 decades of service in the United States Senate than renaming this legislation the Orrin G. Hatch Modernization Act. Under his leadership, as I just mentioned, the bill has gained nearly unanimous support here in the Senate. It passed the House earlier after being thoroughly vetted and compromised and changed. It passed unanimously. It came to the Senate Judiciary Committee where it was considered and it passed by voice vote. And then tonight it passed by voice vote. I want especially to join with Senator Hatch in thanking the other senators who've worked so hard on this, both Democrats as well as Republicans. Senator Whitehouse, Senator Durbin, the assistant Democratic leader who enjoys going to Nashville on a regular basis, has lots of good stories about it. Senator Coons of Delaware. And what this means is that the bill, which has passed the House unanimously, has now passed the Senate. And it will go back to the House because we've made some changes in the bill. That's the way the process works. We've stayed in close touch with the House of Representatives as we've done this. Representative Doug Collins and a number of others in the House have been really extraordinary leaders in pushing this, and I know that Representative Collins and others will work hard. My hope is that the House will be able to pass the Senate bill next week, and the bill will then go to the President and become law. Earlier this evening, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa was on the floor, and he had to leave. I want to join Senator Hatch in thanking Senator Grassley, who's chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who expedited consideration of this bill and was here to speak about it. He asked me to say these words on his behalf. This is from Senator Grassley. The Music Modernization Act will really help songwriters, artists, publishers, producers, distributors, and other music industry stakeholders. This bill is the product, said Senator Grassley, of long and hard negotiations and compromise. Senators Hatch and Alexander especially, but many other senators contributed to this bill. I'm pleased to support this bill, so said Senator Chuck Grassley. One reason this bill has been able to be successful, and one of the senior members of the staff, the Judiciary Committee, was talking to me tonight and said it's a really remarkable piece of legislation because it touches so many of the aspects of the creation of music in our country. And I think that's true. It's a very complex piece of legislation. I asked some of those who were working on it the other day, will this really help the songwriters? The answer was yes, it would. And that is why, and here's why we were able to do this so far. It's because the songwriters and the publishers and the digital music companies and the broadcasters and the record labels and others decided to work together over the last 2 or 3 years on what they agree on instead of what they disagree on. It's taken several years to do this, but I believe it will be worth the effort. What has happened is that the internet has changed the music business in the way it's changed politics, other businesses, and the world. More than half the revenues in the music business now come from music played over the internet. And the legislation is necessary because the copyright laws of our country haven't kept up with the arrival of the internet. And in addition to that, they were way out of date before the internet ever got here. Those copyright laws haven't been modernized since the days of the player piano a century ago. So as a result of that, today's songwriters are often not paid royalties for their songs when their songs are played online. And when they are paid, they aren't paid a fair market value. And as a result, it's become almost impossible for songwriters to make a decent living. Songwriters in Nashville, and we have them all over Tennessee, but Nashville has thousands of them, they typically are taxi drivers, teachers, waitresses, all working to write their first hit. Last Saturday, I was at the Bluebird Cafe in Nashville, where Senator Hatch has been before. Bob DiPiero was there. He was playing some of his songs. And he told the story of how in the 1980s, he was teaching guitar lessons out at the Rivergate Mall. That's how he was earning a living. He'd moved to Nashville from Ohio, and he fell in love with country music. So he'd take a bus out to Rivergate Mall. That took about an hour and an hour back. Teach these kids in the afternoon after school from 3 to 9 o'clock, and during the day he would write songs. Well, nothing happened until he wrote a song called My Baby's American Made, which almost everybody knows the words to. So that song's done pretty well. But to give you an idea of what this bill can mean to most songwriters, let me tell you a story. I mentioned that songwriters can be taxi drivers or waitresses. They can also be United States senators, like Senator Hatch, who actually has a gold record, maybe two, to his credit. He's often co-written with Nashville songwriters. And I had an experience too. A few years ago, I was in my hometown of Maryville, Tennessee, and I went into the drugstore, and as I was coming out, there was this older couple sitting in a pickup truck, and I said, "How are you all doing?" And the woman in the pickup truck said, "We're just falling apart together." Well, it so happens that that weekend, my son, who's in the music business, had a group of songwriters at our home, and they were writing songs. So I said to one of them, whose name was Lee Brice, who's a well-known songwriter and performer, I told him that story about the ladies saying falling apart together. And Lee Brice said, "Hey, we could do something with that." And so he and Billy Montana and John Stone wrote a song, Falling Apart Together. Falling Apart Together went on Lee Brice's album. It was played a lot. And according to the Nashville custom, I got a 1/4 royalty for the song whenever the song is played. Now, Lee's a pretty well-known singer, and you'd think those royalties would add up and give me a nice income in addition to my salary as United States Senator. I checked, and in 2016, I reported on my ethics form that I file each year that my royalties only added up to $101.75. That's for 1/4 of a record that's played on an album of a pretty well-known singer and writer. If you're a songwriter in Nashville or anywhere else, you can't make a living on that. But the Orrin G. Hatch Music Modernization Act will help fix that. Will help make sure that songwriters are paid a fair market value when their songs are played, and that they're actually paid when their songs are played. First, the legislation will make sure songwriters are paid by creating a new entity. Now, this is really an elegant solution to a complicated problem. This new licensing entity will make it easier for digital music companies like Spotify or Amazon or Pandora to obtain a license when let's say they want to play Falling Apart Together. All they have to do is go down to the entity and get a license from that entity to make sure that the four of us who helped write that song are paid whenever a song is played. That can be a big problem for one of the internet companies because they deal in hundreds of thousands, millions of songs, and songwriters end up everywhere in the world. And so finding them is sometimes impossible. That's not good for the songwriter who doesn't get paid. It's not good for the streaming company because they might get sued. And as I said earlier, half the revenues in the music industry come from come from internet songs. So this new entity will collect royalties each time a song is played, look for the songwriter, and hold on to the royalties for 3 years until the songwriter can be found. And as I mentioned, it'll help the digital music companies because it'll reduce the number of lawsuits and make it a lot simpler to be able to get a license for a song. Second, the legislation will make sure that songwriters are paid a fair market value for their songs by doing 3 things. First, it revises the outdated songwriter royalty standards, as I mentioned earlier, go back a century to the days of the player piano. It will replace those with the standard of willing seller and willing buyer. What would the song be worth in the free market, not the statutory rate that's set today? Then the second thing it will do that will help is the legislation will allow ASCAP and BMI, the 2 largest performing rights organizations, to present new evidence about the fair market value of a songwriter's work, like what the performer of the song might earn for their songs. To perform that to a federal court rate judge when there's a dispute about what the royalties are worth. And then finally, the third thing it will do to make sure that songwriters are paid a fairer rate, it will allow ASCAP and BMI to have federal judges in the Southern District of New York, where these cases are heard, to be randomly assigned to the cases rather than having all the proceedings before the same judge. We believe that will produce a fairer outcome for songwriters. So this is a big day for songwriters in Nashville and in Memphis and in Knoxville, Tennessee, as well as all over the country. It's the most important piece of legislation in a generation to help make sure that songwriters are A, paid when their songs are played, and B, paid a fair market value. I want to thank Senator Hatch for his leadership on this. Because he led this effort, because of his prestige here in the Senate, we have 82 co-sponsors of the legislation. We're able to pass it by voice vote tonight, bring it through the Judiciary Committee. I would not want anyone to think that because it passed by such a wide margin that this was a simple exercise. It was a very complicated exercise, and it was in doubt until about an hour and a half ago in terms of whether we would be able to do this tonight. But we wouldn't have been able to do it without Senator Hatch. So I thank him, and I think it is fitting, as he retires this year after 4 decades in the Senate, that we name the most important piece of legislation to help songwriters in a generation. We name that legislation after the Senate songwriter, the Orrin G. Hatch Music Modernization Act. I thank the President. I yield the floor.